Good evening. I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Stillwater Planning Commission of December 1st, 2020. I'll just briefly explain the format of our evening's meeting and the process this evening. We'll call for items on the agenda. The commission will hear staff reports first, and then we'll open it up for public hearing and hear from those in favor and or opposition. Normally we go straight to the applicant first, and then we go to for and against. And when you come to the podium, please clearly state your name and address for the record. And after all interested parties have spoken, public hearing will be closed, and then we'll hear closing remarks and alternatives from staff. We will have, since we have a number of people to speak this evening, we'll limit your comments to 3 minutes each. And please, if the previous people have spoken about whatever the topic is, the thing you were going to say, please be understanding of everyone to allow everyone a chance to speak on whatever they want to bring up to it. With that, we'll go ahead and get started. We'll begin with the first one for public hearing, which is a map amendment MA 20-07, requesting review and approval to rezone property currently addressed as 4818 North Washington Street from residential single-family small lot, RSS, to agriculture A zoning. Staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. Ryan Harkins, Community Development. This is a map amendment at 4814 North Washington. You can see the subject property in the hatch pattern here. It is a larger acreage, approximately, well, just over 14 acres in size. You can see that it's immediately to the south, west of Richmond and Washington. The subject property is inside this yellow polygon here on the aerial. So this would be looking from the southwest to the northeast across the intersection. You can see that it comes back and touches a residential street on the west side and then abuts Washington Street on the east. Again, this is the current zoning map. It shows RSS as well as the subject property inside the hatch pattern. You can see RTM, you can see CS, CG, RSS, as well as a planned unit development that's residential in nature as well in the area. The future land use map is somewhat diluted in this area and a mix of different uses proposed. However, in this area, it does propose a low density residential with commercial immediately next to Washington Street. The low density residential can accommodate, by its definition, dwelling densities of up to 20 dwelling units per acre. It also can include a neighborhood level type of commercial intensity. This is a map amendment to rezone again from RSS to agriculture. So this would be a step down in terms of density and zoning, Euclidean type of zoning. However, it is a necessary map amendment request in order to accommodate a companion specific use request on the agenda for tonight to allow for a medical marijuana grow operation. Staff would be happy to stand for any questions you have.
Okay. I see no questions. Thank you very much. Do we have the applicant? We'll open the public hearing at this point. Do we have the applicant or someone to speak, a representative to speak for the applicant?
Good evening. I'm Kelly Harris with Keystone Engineering, located at 923 South Lowry, here representing the owner tonight, and it looks like the owner is here as well. So tonight, he is requesting this less intense zoning classification in order to use his existing building the way he would like to. In the ag zone, building setbacks become larger and property sizes increase. This property already meets all of the requirements of the ag zone. The uses allowed in RSS are still allowed in the ag zone. And as you look around town, the ag and RSS zones are very often found next to each other. In fact, that's one of the most common neighboring classifications. It's also common to find properties zoned ag within the proximity of the city limits. And This property is located just over a half-mile from the city limits. The Wittenberg Park is just to the north of this, and that's the north property line, or north city limit line. I'm trying to keep my comments separate from the SUP request in the next agenda item, but they do kind of go hand in hand. We need it rezoned in order to ask for the specific use permit for the medical marijuana grow facility. Those are allowed in ag and industrial zones with the SUP. Obviously, we didn't want to go industrial, and ag is much more relatable in this area. It goes hand in hand with the RSS and that residential zoning classifications. So any questions for me? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the item, please step forward and give your name and address for the record. Seeing none. Anyone else? All right. Seeing none, with anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the item, please step forward and state your name and address for the record. And sir, if you could take your hat off so they can see you on the TV. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Aaron, in the Stonecrest edition.
Your name and address, sir. Full name and your address.
Aaron Gamey, 1210 West Stonecrest Avenue.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm kind of speaking on behalf of several of the members, the majority of the Stonecrest edition. Had a few questions that were raised when we learned of the proposal, and some concerns. Several of the concerns would be the close proximity to all three of the neighborhoods and the potential for any exposure to any type of danger that might go on in this type of agriculture request. It's also very close proximity to the Richmond Elementary School. I'm not sure if there's any regulations or city permits or anything of that nature that would require this type of zoning to allow that to be that close to a school by chance. One of the major concerns too is potential devaluation of the homes in these three additions. There is some concern that folks may not want to live within a vicinity of this type of agricultural development. And some of these may be questions that you might be able to answer as well. About the security, what security requirements would be required for the medical marijuana growth of this agricultural question?
The Deputy City Attorney, the city has no standing policies as far as security. That's more or less left up to the individual owners. Okay,
so no gates over or fencing, barbed wire. It can just be
Nothing.
Whoever has the ownership of the land can have no fencing
We don't
whatsoever.
require any kind of security on any other business, and
Okay.
so we're not allowed to on that business.
Okay, so I think the lack of the security around the proposed growth facility, which sits right off of Washington, I think that causes a concern for several of the residents in the areas. Are these facilities, are they still federally legal, or are they illegal federally? Are these type of facilities federally legal, or are they still federally illegal?
They're legal in the state.
In the
that's
state?
As far as we
Okay.
regulate.
Can they use banks and debit cards just like any normal business can, or is it cash distribution only?
It's up to them how they want to run the business.
Okay, because there was a concern that if it was just cash only, that it might often be a target of potential theft and robberies, so an additional increase or uptick in crime in the area potentially.
If they're a grow facility, they're not a retail facility, so there's no cash transactions on a
Okay.
regular basis.
Okay. And then Some of the research that some of the individuals came up with says, according to the New York Times, the smell can be overwhelming. Farms in California have had to invest hundreds of thousands in filtration systems to try to reduce the smell. Even though this is a proposed indoor facility, there is fact that smell is still and can be an issue. Several of the residents in these communities have small children and elderly with respiratory issues, so that's a concern that's been raised by all the members. And that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wishing to speak in opposition to the item, please step forward, present your name and address for the record.
Good evening. Thank you. My name is Barden Kellum, and I live at 1321 Falls Drive. And this zoning that is being asked for, probably, as you see, butts right back up the Falls Drive. I think Tom owns all that all the way through to 6th Street right there. But my concerns is I don't think that ag zoning is complementary to the rest of the zoning around us. I would consider this spot zoning, where all the zoning around and you're picking out and you're sticking ag zoning right here in the middle. I just don't think it's complementary to the rest of the zoning around us, which is residential. And I don't know that this is compatible with the long-term comprehensive plan of the city of Stillwater to do spot zoning agricultures in spots in places like this. So I have the same concerns as the people, the other guys just here, that I believe that if we allow this to go to ag zoning, it could be this tomorrow, but it could be something else a year from now. Or, you know, where does this end? Tom may be there today, he may not be there tomorrow, so I'm concerned about being ag zoning, what's the long-term effect on it? I do think that if it goes to ag zoning, that it could be affect the property owners in the falls, and I'm one of those property owners. It could be detrimental to our values and our properties. And, you know, like if you have this facility, it's zoned ag, and you have this facility, then, you know, who's going to want to buy a house there? You know, so those are my major concerns. So thank you very much. Any questions for me? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak in opposition to the item, please step forward, present your name and address for the record.
My name is Stephen Veach. I live at 4700 North Washington, just south of the proposed project. What I would like to see the commission do is approve the detailed area for agricultural with the grow facility, not the total 14 acres. Just the area that's identified for the grow facility would be fine with me.
Thank you, sir. Sorry, just to get some notes. Anyone else wishing to speak in opposition to the item, please step forward and present your...
Can I ask you something? The people speaking today only have the permit, had to submit the permit online to talk today?
No, they did not. People that are here can come up if they're here. You did not have to submit online if you did not want to.
I want to say something else.
Okay, and we have someone over here as well, so go ahead. Go ahead, ma'am, if you'd like.
Thanks.
Please come up, give your name and address for the record.
Okay, so my name is Diana Romano, and I also live at Stonecrest, 5024 North Garfield. And I just want to add a little bit to the concern that the other people have said. Not only, you know, it can decrease the value of our homes, but I also don't like the idea of having this agriculture like zone in the middle of the residential areas. Like they say at the beginning, even though it's only half a mile away from the city limits, I still think it's within the city limits. And I think Oklahoma and this area is very like vast, that if somebody wants to have a, you know, growing facility for, you know, marijuana or anything else, maybe they can find some other area that is actually outside the city limits. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sir, sorry about that. I apologize about that. Please come forward, give your name and address for the record.
My name is Ladd Hudgens. My residence is at 1308 Falls Drive. And I'm really here on behalf of the Falls Homeowners Association and representing our president, who could not be here tonight. And you've heard some good arguments put forward already, and I'll try not to repeat those. But one of my concerns, my house is actually just across the street from on Falls Drive, within a 300 feet area of the area that's going to be zoned agriculture, if that's permitted. But one of the things that hasn't been mentioned tonight, some of our homeowners wonder as we interpret the graphics, there is an entrance off Falls Drive into this property. And one of the things we would be interested in is hearing the folks that want to develop this industry, if they would be using the entrance off of our main drive, which is Falls Drive. And we would hate to see, there are some children in the area, and we would hate to see additional commercial traffic coming off of Falls Drive going into this property. So we would like that clarified. If the main entrance to the property and the new growing facility would be Washington, or would it be Falls Drive as well? So that's an additional concern. We do have concern that it would devalue the property. There are 3 additions, ours and 2 more, Stonecrest, and another addition there that is, I think all the property owners have the same concern, is if we're going to go commercial here, and especially this, a new industry like this, what it would do to our property values. But especially too, we'd like that clarified on which drive the growers would be using. But I do have a petition I would like to submit, and it is a petition of all the homeowners in our association, all requesting the commission deny this request. And I'll leave it with the secretary, if that's okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else wishing to speak in opposition for the matter, please step forward and present your name and address for the record.
My name is Ari Means, and I live 1423 Falls Drive, and I'll make my comments very short. I just want to bring even more of a human connection to this discussion. On the map, that we have, there actually is immediately adjacent to this property a family that have 2 small children, and that would be on the southwest side, and on the southeast side there's another home. Actually, it does have college students in it, but both of these properties that are occupied, especially with the small children, are within feet. I'm not talking about hundreds of feet. I'm talking about within feet of the borders of this property. And if there is a security issue, a safety issue, both of these homes will be in direct line of any type of problem. And I do believe it should be incumbent on the city to help to ensure the safety of these 2 homes. Yes, I am really concerned about the properties, the 3 areas, 3 developments in this immediate area, but we also have other neighborhoods as well. And once again, even though this may be legal in Oklahoma, on the federal level, as it was stated earlier, at the federal level, it still is a Class 1 drug. Therefore, there will be individuals who may consider taking advantage at what they may consider opportune time to try to exploit the materials there, which would put our entire community potentially at risk. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We did have one online request to speak tonight, Aaron Gamey. Gimi, you already spoke? Okay, I just wanted to make sure. I'm sorry about that. I missed you on that. Anyone else wishing to speak in opposition to the item? Ma'am, if you'd like, please step forward. Give your name and address for the record. And then sir, I'll get you over here.
My name is Michelle Magalassi. I live at 1320 Falls Drive. And I would just like to reiterate what my neighbor Ladd said. On our petition, we had 100% participation of our neighborhood in opposition of the rezoning to agriculture and the subsequent building of a grow facility. And our main concern really, or one of our main concerns, is that ingress and egress onto Falls Drive. And like Dr. Means just said, we have lots of children in our neighborhood. The ingress and egress will be right by someone's home with young children. We have a lot of walkers in our neighborhood, and we are very concerned what would be happening on that property. So I just want to state that we are against the approval of this rezoning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sir.
Hello, I'm John Jennings of the 1509 Falls Drive. And, you know, without going over a lot of the items that have already been addressed, I just think we have a really nice neighborhood. It's quiet. When the car comes in, usually we know who the car, you know, where it's going. If we feel like with the added traffic that's possible from this business, if it is zoned and allowed to put in a growing operation, it'll just add to the traffic from our area. As a matter of fact, a real estate agent once said we have one of the best kept secrets in Stillwater, the area that we live in. It's one way in and one way out, so the added traffic is going to cause problems. We have some children, some young children that do live in the area, and you see them out playing in the streets at times. I just really feel like it's not an area that would be advantageous to have this kind of a operation going in our neighborhood. Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak in opposition to the item, please step forward and give your name. Yes, ma'am.
Sheila Means at 1423 Falls Drive. And first of all, I just agree with everything that everyone have already said in opposition. But the point that I want to make is this. I live in Falls Drive, and I've been there for 8 years. And I love the neighborhood and the community that I live in and the surrounding neighborhoods. But if I did not live in Falls Drive and I knew that this was going to be happening, I would not be choosing to live in Falls Drive. And so I feel like if this is allowed to happen, if any of us in Falls Drive needed to move for some reason and put our houses up for sale, it would be very difficult for us to be able to sell our homes because we have a marijuana facility in the neighborhood. And I really would like you all to consider that. Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak in opposition to the item? Anyone else wishing to speak in opposition to the item? All right. Seeing none, I'll declare the public hearing closed, and we'll have staff comments and alternatives.
Okay, so right now the land development code will allow for rezoning through the map amendment process. Currently, agricultural zoning or A zoning is not an adjacent zoning district found surrounding this subject property. However, the applicant has requested this map amendment in order to apply for a specific use permit to allow for this growing operation. As you can see in the next item, the SUP is proposed with a grow operation to be at the front of the property close to Washington Street. But that is only allowed with the SUP. The comp plan currently calls for a mix of commercial and low-density residential, as we mentioned earlier. That also means when we talk about neighborhood serving commercial, it's more of a convenience type of situation. Convenience stores or something that would be focused on the surrounding residential areas, not more of a community-wide type of commercial. With that in mind, you can accept the findings in the staff report and recommend approval to City Council as presented. You can find the request as not appropriate and recommend denial. If you also feel additional information or discussion is needed, you can table the item to a date certain as well. Questions about alternatives or findings of staff?
Doesn't look to be. Thank you very much. Commissioners' discussion and or, actions, questions?
I think one question, can you hear me okay?
No, I think you need to come a little closer. Sorry.
I think one question I would have for the applicant or the applicant's representative would be the question that was raised in the opposition regarding ingress egress from the residential neighborhood. Is that intended?
We'll allow the applicant to come up and answer the question, or the applicant or representative. The question at hand was with regard to the Falls Drive entrance or access from Falls Drive into the agricultural facility.
Okay.
There were some comments that they thought there was an entrance there, and if so, would that be used for
Gotcha.
egress and entrance into this
Okay.
property?
Gotcha.
So, sir, you give your name and address.
You
for the
bet.
record.
My name is Tom Everett at 4818 North Washington. I'm the one that's wanting to put the facility in. No, there will be no access off of the Falls Drive. It's not I use it right now just to put a boat in and out of there, but that's it. It's just a one-way drive in dirt. So as far as the security measure goes, it's not up to the city, it's the state. And there's more security at that house than most banks have. So I understand that everybody's concerned on that, and we have kids as well. We wouldn't want them to wander over into it, but there's going to be fencing. There's going to be a lot of stuff by the state that has to go into that facility before I can even get licensed out on it. So this is just the first step of it, and I'm sure there's a lot of concerns on it, but there's also, to let you guys know that the odor that you guys are talking about, there's not an odor over there. If there was, somebody would have already noticed it. But we had found out that we were not zoned correctly, so we shut it down, made sure we were good with the state, and went down this road. So that's where we're at with it. And I'm sure there's a lot of concerns and questions, but whatever I can answer, I'll be more than happy to.
Other questions from the commissioners, if any?
I know they say that the facility you plan on building is close to the Washington Street.
Yeah, it's a 30 by 40 shop that's already existing, and it's probably 150 foot from Washington Street.
14 acres is quite a bit of space. Would you ever have any intention of adding additional buildings?
We're not. That's not on our agenda at all. I mean, no. To put it briefly, we have no plans of building anything else out over there.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, sir. Unfortunately, no. Commissioners can ask a question at this point. I'm sorry about that. It's just.
The public hearing portion of the presentation is closed, so the only people that can speak now are the commission, and if they have questions, they can ask them, but unfortunately, it's closed for the public at this point.
Mr. Everett, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Have you had any conversations with or meetings with the neighbors to talk about their concerns privately or individually or?
Not at the falls, I have not. I have talked to the neighbor to the north of me, which is Joe Haney, and Chad and Joy Kaywood just built a house there. I've talked to them. They have no opposition against it. And, but no, as far as back in the falls, I have not spoke with anybody there.
Thank you.
Is that it?
Thank you, sir. Discussion from commissioners, or a motion, or?
I think I have a couple more questions for clarification. I know he says he does not plan on using the Falls Drive to enter. He is currently using that now as a dirt road. Is there anything to prevent him from doing that in the future? I know today he says no, he has no intention of using that road, but could it happen in the future? Is there anything to stop him from doing that in the future? And also, if he has one building now, is there anything to stop him from adding additional buildings in the future? I know he says no today, but what stops him from doing that? Because 14 acres is a lot of land.
You're right. It's a 14-acre tract. Right now, OMMA regulates security with regard to fencing and things like that, which the applicant mentioned. They also regulate it as a cash business. Local control is not a part of that equation. With regard to additional buildings, as long as the applicant met setback requirements and building code, they could add additional buildings if they chose to later. If they sold the property and the grow operation transferred to somebody else and a new owner wanted to do that, they could do that as well. With ag zoning, and with an SUP in place, you can grow medical marijuana indoors or outdoors. That is the one unique aspect of that in the ag zoning district as well.
Versus if it were commercial zoning, they would have to do it indoors.
Grow
correct?
operations are not allowed in commercial zoning. They're allowed in industrial zoning districts in our code. That would be an indoor growing operation only. With regard to the access back to the west, if at some point they chose to try and do any improvements to do that, as long as they met city standards for the curb access and things like that, it's something that would be allowed. With their building this close to Washington Street, we would imagine most of the access coming off of that. Okay. The SUP can regulate access. Obviously, that's the next item on the agenda, but if that's an issue, that can be dealt with through that process as well.
I had one small point. When you give the zoning comparison chart to us with regard to ag versus RSS, it says conventional single-family accessory to principal use. Does that mean single-family is allowed in agriculture, or is it only allowed if I'm a farmer and I decide to put my house on my land, kind of thing?
It would be allowed if you, for example, are a farmer and you put your house on that property that's zoned ag, if the farming is the principal use.
Okay.
So in this case, if the medical marijuana production, it becomes the principal use of the property, the house could be remaining as an accessory structure.
And to the entrance onto the falls, should he change his mind and decide he wants to use that entrance, does he have the ability to do that? Or is that it's not a private street because it's not gated, so does he have?
He would, yes.
Okay.
If that's something you wanted to restrict, you would have to do that through the SUP process.
Looks like no more questions for staff. Thank you all.
So some thoughts about the zoning. As was pointed out earlier, and it is quite common to see, you do see agricultural next to RSS. That's very common. It's a little unusual to see going from RSS to ag within the city limits. Usually we're going the other way. So this is a little bit different to go down in density like this. But given the amount of residential around it, industrial sure doesn't seem like that would be good. So it seems like of the options to pursue this endeavor, that agriculture would be an appropriate use. I don't have any reservations about the agricultural zoning.
Okay. Other comments from commissioners or any other thoughts in that regard with regard to the zoning per se to ag? If not, then do we have a motion or from the alternatives? We have the three choices to approve, deny, or table to a date certain. Those are their three options, so we've got to come up with one of those.
So here are my thoughts. We have a room full of citizens whose concerns are we should respect, in my opinion. We have an applicant who has property that he would like to do something with that meets legal standards, meets code. I do feel like there's a disconnect, and in my opinion, I think it would make some logical sense to send it back to them to have a seat at the table and hammer some of these issues out, have conversations, address their concerns, instead of settling it in here, because this is not a courtroom, and come back in a couple of weeks and say, hey, did you have those conversations? Did you reach any kind of agreement? Where are we now? And proceed at that point. The applicant did indicate he met with one, I don't recall which direction it was, I don't think it was to the north, but he met with some homeowners and they were okay with it, but he did not meet with the Falls homeowners. So there's a disconnect, and that's my opinion at this time.
Okay.
Back to what she said over here, as far as it being zoned agricultural, I truly don't see that would be a problem. I think it's a special use permit that we're going to have to tackle next. So the rezoning it to agricultural would not permit him to do that. We still have the next step to follow. So I think as she said, it fits the agricultural zoning.
Okay. Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to accept findings and recommend that the City Council approve the proposed map amendment as presented.
I can second that.
It has been moved and seconded that we accept staff findings and recommend approval. We will now vote. One of the records didn't choose. I voted yes. You got to do a roll call. I'm sorry. The little electronic e-voting thing isn't working.
Mr. Rickleman?
Yes.
Mrs. Phillips?
Yes.
Mrs. Jerome?
Yes.
Mr. Allred?
Yes.
The motion passes 4 yes to no nos. The next item on the agenda is a specific use permit, SUP 20-08, requesting review and approval of a specific use permit to allow a medical marijuana grow facility at property addressed as 4818 North Washington Street in the Agriculture A zoning district. Staff.
Okay, so this is a specific use permit application for the medical marijuana growing facility at the same address the map amendment we just discussed is at. Again, subject property is in the hatch pattern. This is looking from essentially what would be the glide path of the airport or in that general vicinity, looking toward Richmond and Washington. So you can see Wittenberg Park here. You can see residential, 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 multifamily, manufactured housing. You can see on the zoning map the subject property and the adjacent zoning districts. Comprehensive plan again indicates low density residential farther back on the west side of these areas, and then commercial right along Washington Street. The SUP is a requirement of the Land Development Code in order to have a medical marijuana growing facility. Under the current code in the ag zoning district, it is allowed as an indoor or outdoor operation. You can see in the site plan that was included in the staff report, the applicant is proposing using an existing building that's toward Washington Street, right behind what would be an old tennis court. With that, staff can answer any questions. The applicant and their agent are here as well to answer questions.
Questions for staff? Doesn't look like any. Thank you very much. I will now open the public hearing. We will hear from the applicant or the representative, please.
Good evening, Kelly Harris again with Keystone Engineering, located at 923 South Lowry, here representing the owner tonight. So our code states that the purpose of a specific use permit are because the uses identified as requiring specific use permits are more intense or have greater impact than those permitted by right. Such uses shall be evaluated based upon their ability to be located next to less intensive uses. In this case, the building is already existing and would not cause an impact to the surrounding properties. Due to the size of the property, the existing building is located well beyond the setback requirements. And then I'll just go over a couple of the concerns that was brought up. So a grow facility is required to be certain distances away from schools, and this property does meet that requirement. If you all would like, you can add the requirement that no public traffic, I'm not sure how to word that, but only the landowner can use that private drive from the falls. There's no public traffic through that drive. We can put that on the plan.
Maybe no commercial access?
Yes, yep. I don't know if commercial is the right word because I don't believe grow facilities are commercial.
Business related?
Yeah, but I think they would get the point with that note. It's also my understanding that specific use permits were tied to what we show on the plans. And this is in regards to additional buildings or additional expansion of the business, that if there were a desire to grow, you would have to revise this SUP, and I believe it would have to come back through the public hearing portion of that. There is an administrative approval if you do minor changes, but I'm sure additional buildings would not be considered minor. The owner had addressed the security and the smell, and then we were talking about restricting the access to that back drive. I will just say that the existing building has been in place for a while. It's a one-story metal building. It is 200 feet from the south property line and 215 feet from Washington, the east property line. You know, I didn't even do a dimension to the back property because it's so much farther. We're probably talking 700 feet, 800 feet to the back property line. Any other questions for me?
Was there any, although indoor and outdoor is both allowed by, under the permit, it's indoor only is what I'm hearing about.
Correct.
Hearing so far.
Yeah, that's the only thing we're asking for.
Any other questions from the commissioners for the applicant?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the permit, please step forward, give your name and address for the record. Seeing none, anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the item, please step forward, give your name and address for the record. Yes, sir. Yeah, sorry about that.
Again, my name is Stephen Veach. I live at 4700 North Washington, just south of the proposed property. I reviewed the application pursuant to section 23180. There's a checklist that has to go through in order to submit the permit. It appears item G was missing from the permit. Existing use of abutting and adjoining properties was not identified on the permit application. Also, I'd like to point out that the specific use permit would only be applied to the detailed area in the site plan, not the entire 14-acre property. That if they decided to change that, they'd have to come back to the commission and request another special use permit to include that. Is that the way that reads? Only the detailed area would be the specific
Sir,
use permit.
If you can direct your questions or comments to the commission, please.
Yeah.
Okay.
For us, yeah.
That the specific use permit would only be for the detailed area in the site plan.
That's what the applicant had said they thought was the case. Staff, is that correct, that their assumption on that with regard to the special use permit is only to that which is presented as such? Or does it need to be changed? Is there need to be?
We look at it as specific to the area shown on the site plan. If the commission wants to add that as a condition, they can certainly do that in a matter of just formality.
Okay. Okay, sir. Did that make sense?
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else wishing to speak in opposition, please step forward, present your name and address for the record.
Hi, my name is Chris Lewis, and I live at 1202 West Stonecrest. Just to reiterate one of the points that's been brought up, when I heard about this coming up, I reached out to a police officer friend of mine and asked, should I have any concerns about this? And he said the number one thing is the potential for robbery. Because this is a cash-only business, and that's required by the state because federally they can't take that money and put it in a bank, they're an easy target and a common target for theft. And so I think one of my main concerns is that being introduced into our residential areas that are nearby.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wishing to speak in opposition to the item, please step forward and present your name and address for the record.
My name is Barton Kellum, 1321 Falls Drive, and this may be more of a question for you guys and maybe the attorneys on that staff like that. It would be my understanding that once you zone it agriculture, then the state's going to allow him the use permit. He can go do that. You can't stop him. I don't know if you guys understand it or not, but I thought state law allows him, he doesn't, you can go through the process, but that's just a formality to get that use permit. So, maybe Kelly can answer, or maybe Robert can,
He's required to get a special use permit.
But it's a formality.
Well, it's not a this is
State-
it, it's
the
not a
state-
formality,
doesn't
sir.
Doesn't state law say that he can, once it's zoned ag, it's qualified, he has the right to go do that?
This, not within the city limits.
No,
Sir. Within city limits, we require the special use permit.
Okay.
It's allowed in the area, but we require a special use permit.
So you can zone
for-
it agriculture, but you could deny the use permit
That is an option that can be made, yes, sir.
because of the other concerns. Just a question, that's all I have.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak in opposition to the item, please step forward, present your name and address for the record.
Okay, so my name is Diana Romano, and I live at 5024 North Garfield. And again, I have a similar question like before. So if you guys already approved that this is gonna be like an ag zone, basically like this owner or any other owner, they can basically, grow anything they want on there, right? So, I mean, as a homeowner, we are worried that not only because of the medical marijuana, but in the future it could be like any other thing, even if it's just like produce. Like I think it's nice if people want to have like their own little, garden in the backyard, but just having an agriculture zone next to our neighborhoods, I just think it's crazy, but of course I respect your decision. But my question is this gonna stop them or anybody else from like growing other stuff there? Or now that it's an agriculture zone, I guess it can become a full operation farm in the future, and then we will just have to live with it?
It is, if the zoning to agriculture goes through, then all uses which are allowed by right in agriculture are available to the owners of that property, yes.
Okay, yes.
Whatever that would be.
Thank you. Yeah, we were a little worried because of that. Thanks.
Yeah, okay. Anyone else wishes to speak? Yes, sir, please come forward.
Harry Means, 1423 Stonecrest. Based on, I think that was a great question. Does that mean that they could also have livestock? Livestock? If
the zoning change to agriculture goes, then any use that's allowed by right in agriculture would go through. So if livestock is allowed, then yes. I don't know all the uses that could happen in ag, but if it's allowed by right, then yes, it is, sir.
And I'm just wondering, based on what I've heard prior to this, are we technically, are they petitioning technically to establish a business or to continue a business? Because if I understand the conversation earlier, they had an operation, the operation that we're discussing, and they stopped. And I'm wondering, are we really debating or discussing them continuing the business? And if they had that business, technically, was it legal? Technically, was it legal? Without permission, without the correct formalities, all the various approvals, and they were growing marijuana, whether you want to call it medical or whatever otherwise. Was that legal within the city limits of Stillwater? And then, if not, should we be given a second chance to do things right if it wasn't done correctly the first time? And if it is to be established in the city limits of Stillwater, are the elements to do this type of business still there? So all they need to do is just open the door and turn on the lights. Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak in opposition to the item, please step forward, give your name and address for the record. Anyone else wishing to speak? Seeing none, then I will close the public hearing and ask for staff's alternatives.
Okay, so at the present time, medical marijuana growing facilities are allowed with a specific use permit in the ag zoning district. SUPs are site-specific, they're address-specific. In the case of, if it was a dispensary in a commercial zoning district or a grow operation in a case like this, if the ownership were to change, they would go through their own licensing process all over again if ownership changed hands. Right now, as long as they have the license from OMMA and an approved SUP, they can operate. If they were operating illegally and then stopped because they realized they were missing something or their license wasn't complete, that's not something we would necessarily know unless it was identified and brought to our attention, either by the owner or by other entities. In the case of this specific property in this SUP application, they do meet the requirements if the rezoning is approved and the SUP is approved and they have the pertinent license. The way OMMA operates in many cases is they ask for new applications to go through the local approval process first. The way OMMA also structures the licensing process is municipalities have to have an avenue for them to operate and a process in place. The city's land development code specifies the SUP as that process within particular zoning districts. So that's how each dispensary and each grow operation come through the planning commission and ultimately the council. With that said, if the SUP is approved and the rezoning is approved and they have the actual license, then yes, they can operate. With that in mind, your alternatives are to accept the findings and recommend approval to City Council as presented. You can find the request is not appropriate and recommend denial. Or if you feel additional discussion and information is needed, you can table this item to a date certain.
Any additional questions for staff?
Okay, thank you.
Yes, not. Thank you. Well, commissioners, discussion and/or motion? Well, I think we've, have been at least two, I'm not going to call them restrictions, but two things that seem to at least resolve some of the concerns of many of the people that have come forward, the citizens that have come forward. One with regard to business related to some sort of access from falls. And the other was the restricting of the SUP to the areas shown in the presented maps or diagrams that have been given to us. The first, because it keeps vehicles or whatever traffic occurs through this operation, whatever we want to call it, from the residential area, which makes perfect sense on the facility. The second, to ensure that instead of having tomorrow 15 warehouses growing things on the 14-acre plot, it's one place and one location. So at least those two do acknowledge some of the concerns while respecting the applicant's requests to us. And we can place restrictions on things that we, in our motions, when we give reasons, we have to give reasons for why we do that. So just FYI.
I'm just going to voice my opinion for a minute.
That's good.
We've approved a lot of these. Most of them have been in industrial areas. I know people who have done it outside of city limits, and they don't have to go through this process. I think that the impact that this will have on the surrounding homes and homeowners and their children and their families, I don't think it's a fit for the area. I know that they've overcome many obstacles and done a lot of the things correctly, but I just think there's a better place for it. With that, I'm going to move that we find that it is not appropriate use for the property based on the impacts to the surrounding vicinity, and that we do not recommend that the City Council approve the SUP.
Not hearing a second, the motion dies for lack of a second at this point.
So I'll say I echo the chair's sentiments. I think that the questions that were brought up, the concerns that were brought up were addressed for the most part with the access, security, the SUP being specific to the area and to an address. I know Commissioner Allred had made a comment earlier in the evening thinking perhaps there was maybe some discussion that needed to be had, and so just wondering if perhaps you had any more comment you wanted to make on that.
Commissioner, I would very much be in favor of sending this back, holding off a couple of weeks, sending this back to the neighbors, sending this back to Mr. Everett and Ms. Harris. Maybe they can all have a seat at the table, hammer out some of their concerns, see if they can come to some sort of, not necessarily resolution, but some sort of meeting of the minds, and then come back, see what those findings are, and see where we can go from there. I would be very much in favor of that.
I think just if that is the case and you wanted to do that, what particular what information or discussion do you want to hear back from if we table it to a date certain? That is, what is the specific thing you want back to know? Because we're saying we're not accepting, we will table this for a period of time for reason X. We need what specific, that they talk to one another is, I mean, that might be enough, but what is it that you're looking for that we would come back at a date certain and say, okay, now that we've heard X, now we will make a decision?
So if memory serves me right, they took a vote in the Falls Homeowner Association, and everyone was unanimous that they do not want this. I think we have to be respectful of that. I asked the applicant if he had had any conversations with any members of Falls Homeowner Association, and his answer was no. So my thoughts are, however, he did indicate he had conversations with other homeowners in adjacent areas, and they're okay with it. So if you connect the dots, it seems that there is either no communication that has taken place. If there is communication that could take place, perhaps the Falls Homeowners Association residents could then jump on board and say, hey, you know what, we actually are okay with this, with maybe this exception or that exception, which we can amend up here.
Okay.
That's kind of my thoughts.
Okay.
So would you entertain, or would you be in favor of tabling this until that meeting can happen between the Falls Because it's homeowners association, leadership, and the applicant.
100%. I would 100% be okay with that. And I'm happy to entertain a motion to do that at this time, if that's appropriate.
It is one of the options available
Option
to us.
available.
And so if you wish to make that
So
motion.
without objection, I would like to make a motion, and I believe we have to set that date.
You set the date.
Within, and the maximum is 60 days. 60.
Any reasonable amount of time.
So.
One meeting, 2 meetings out.
So 2
Yeah, the
weeks from now is the
15th.
15th.
Then 2 weeks is the 15th, and then the next one would be the second week of January, because I think we shift over a week on January 19th. Sorry, I just have to get the schedule. So the next upcoming meetings on the December we talked about that one, but then January 5 and January 19 are the next 3 meetings.
I mean, I would be happy with setting it for January 5. I mean, that gives a month, especially
Okay.
with holidays and things like that coming up that
Okay.
can allow for an extended period of time, so.
I think that sounds reasonable.
Okay, so I think the motion is that we are going to find the alternative information and discussion is needed prior to make a recommendation. We're tabling the request to January 5, 2021, and the request is to have the 19th? I think he said the 5th is what he wanted.
Yeah.
The 5th.
The 5th, correct.
And have the property owner and the Falls residents time to speak and discuss the project. Did I correctly characterize that motion?
Correct. And then, we've done this previously. They can even engage city staff to have a staff member, Mr. Harkins, at the table to address city regulations and ordinance too, if they so choose to do that. But I would strongly encourage those conversations to happen with Mr. Everett and the Falls homeowners president or leadership, however that may be.
I'm sorry.
I'll second the motion.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded that we will table the SUP request to January 5, 2021, to give opportunity for the owner and the property association in the Falls time to speak. Okay? All right.
Mr. Reckelman?
Yes.
Mrs. Phillips?
Yes.
Mrs. Jerome?
Yes.
Mr. Allred?
Yes.
Thank you very much. The next item on our agenda is final plat, SUB 20-15, requesting review and approval for final plat of Fry Farms Phase 1 to create a residential subdivision of 102 residential lots on property currently addressed as 1998 West 32nd Avenue in the residential single-family small lot RSS district. This item had been tabled from the November 3rd, 2020 meeting. Staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Ryan Harkins, Community Development. So, as the chair mentioned, this was deferred to this meeting due to a number of infrastructure issues being discussed still. The subject property for this first phase of final platting is in the hatch pattern before you. On the aerial, you can see a rough outline of the subject property as well. So this would be looking, as you can see, from really the southwest, looking to the north, across 32nd and along Western. This is, as you may remember, adjacent to the Park Valley subdivision. So this would be looking at street level at 32nd and Western. This is another view of that. This is the proposed phase 1 that the applicant and their engineer have brought to the city. You can see an access point off 32nd as well as one off Western. The applicant has done some revisions to their improvement plans Staff has had some additional comments that we're trying to work through. Most of those deal with some issues related to naming of streets, as well as some other things related to the traffic impact study. Specifically, trying to work with both subdivisions about ensuring that there is currently enough right-of-way or that there will be for any proposed improvements related to the traffic impact study. Right now, the TIA only proposes, which is one joint traffic impact study between both subdivisions, a roundabout at the intersection of 26th and Western. The traffic impact study really proposes that in later phases of development, not at the beginning, nor does it specify who pays for it, which would by default mean the city would have to pay for it out of its normal funding sources. The lots range that are proposed anywhere from 5,000 square feet to roughly 7,100 square feet in size. There is one outlot that is, in this case, that is proposed. It's right here. With that, staff would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
It looks like from the substantial list that they had not answered any of the questions in November. It looks like at least there's been movement on many of the items, if not all. I'm not saying all the items, but on many of the items, as opposed to none of the items on the previous, when we brought this up previously. Am I correct in?
That would be correct.
Okay.
We still have some discussion with them about determining where, for example, streetlight easements and things like that would be located, and a few of those things. We feel like those are details that can be worked out. We would work those out before we would take the plat for either development to council for acceptance. But we feel like we've made progress. We still have some sticking points, again, related to those issues, as well as the traffic impact study.
Good. Okay. Thank you. That was my question. Any other questions to staff from the board? Thank you very much. Okay. We'll now open the public hearing. Those wishing to speak in favor, or the applicant or their representative wishing to speak in favor, please come and state your name and address for the record. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the item, please step forward. Seeing none, anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the item, please step forward, state your name and address for the record. Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing and ask for staff recommendations, or alternatives, sorry, not recommendations.
Okay, so with this in mind, staff has issued the findings that the proposed density in this first phase of the final plat meets the RSS zoning requirements. The Land Development Code notes that subdivisions with over 30 lots have to have 2 points of access. There's 102 lots proposed. They do have the 2 access points currently in this first phase. The additional phases would be connecting to this, so that it would provide additional access later on as well. The proposed layout does meet substantially the requirements of the zoning ordinance and subdivision regulations. It also, in the comprehensive plan, is an area that is recommended as low-density residential, which this would fall in line with that. Again, that goes anywhere from the conventional single-family detached up to 20 dwelling units per acre in terms of multifamily. This certainly meets that classification. So with that said, you can accept the findings and recommend acceptance and approval by City Council. You can find the request for approval is not appropriate and recommend denial. Or you can table the item to a certain date if you feel there's additional discussion that's needed. If you feel like, for example, you want the developer and their engineer to finish working through the issues with staff before you approve it and send it to council, that is certainly one example of an alternative you could take with regard to tabling to a later date. Questions about the findings or alternatives?
I did have a question. So you said you do feel like that you can work with the applicant through the other items that are remaining. The one item you did talk about was the traffic impact study. So is that one of the things that the applicant would be taking care of? Or that's
That's
still
one
on the
that's
table?
unknown. Engineering has reviewed, city engineering has reviewed the traffic impact study. They feel like a center turn lane is needed along Western for these two subdivisions because of the significant number of lots involved right off in the first phase of both plats. They also feel traffic signalization is needed at 26th and Western. The traffic impact study only recommends a roundabout. I would remind the commission that 26th and 32nd and Western right now are three separate rural section line roads. So 2 lanes paved, 1 in each direction, side ditches, no shoulders. So to go from that to 4-lane arterial built out with curb and gutter and storm sewer, things of that nature, are substantial improvements that are costly. And we're well beyond what we talked about 30 years ago when I was, or younger, when I was a toddler, of $1 million a mile. So these will not be cheap improvements. And again, without spelling out even the timing of those improvements, that is literally their only recommendation, a roundabout in later phases. So to even not even call out is a little questionable as far as calling out which phase, but those are the big sticking points right now. We're beginning to work through now that we're kind of come down on what we think is necessary.
One more question with regard to possibility of a wider, if in the future a wider thoroughfare is needed. Does the right-of-way that is in the plat allow for a wider road along Western?
So we even double-checked with city engineering this morning on this item. They feel they have 100 feet right now, for example, along Western, and that would be adequate to do that. However, if you have to add additional lane width or spacing for any reason beyond that, you would need to take out lots along Western, for example, to do that, or 26th. Okay. Right now, on along 26th, that would give, those aren't platted or proposed in a final plat fashion, so the developer would have time there. However, down on 32nd, this proposed plat wraps down Western and along 32nd, so you would have to take out buildable lots to do anything beyond the right-of-way now.
Okay. Thank you.
And I would say right now in the land development code, there really isn't much to require that type of dedication or fee in lieu.
Sure. Okay.
Any other questions for staff? Okay, thank you. Discussion by commissioners. I know that when we tabled it before, we had 3 different engineers in 3 meetings, none of whom seemed to know anything about the project at all. All had remarked that they were just there because the other person couldn't be there, and so we tabled it to give them time. It does look like they've made substantial progress towards the list of activities thereof, and as such, I'm amenable to accepting the final platting. We accepted the preliminary platting. We're now here to go forward with it.
So I'm a little disappointed that the engineer did not show up this evening to come back and address these issues, but I will say that there have been a lot of headway made on the issues.
And we still got to come back to the other piece of this whole project, which is not yet to final plat, I don't.
Right. I think I'm a little torn with not having a more robust traffic impact study. But I
think
don't.
the study's been made, it's what the consequences are,
Right,
I think
right.
is where the.
But I am happy to hear that we have adequate right-of-way to do some improvements. So I would be fine approving final plat.
I'll move that we accept findings and approve the proposed final plat as presented.
I'll second.
It has been moved and seconded that we accept staff findings and recommend for approval the final plat. We'll now vote.
Mr. Rickleman?
Yes.
Mrs. Phillips?
Yes.
Mrs. Durham?
Yes.
Mr. Ulrich?
Yes.
The motion passes 4 yes to no no's. The next item on our agenda, the next item is preliminary plat SUB 20-18, requesting review and approval to create 14 residential lots and 2 commercial lots at property addressed as 3524 West 19th in the Commercial General Zoning District. Staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This was an area that originally was part of a planned unit development. The subject property is within the hatch pattern here at 19th and Sanger. You can see on the aerial in the red outline the subject property as well. The area is a mix of commercial and residential development. What the applicant is proposing tonight is residential lots here as well as through here. I will go back to this. What they're looking at is street extension with one outlot, so one block here, and then one here, with a turnaround maintained by the HOA in order to provide access to these proposed lots here as well. Again, it is a residential subdivision as part of a larger planned unit development that's been amended. The original versus the amended PUD had the percentages of commercial versus residential properties changed. It was still within the original auspices of the PUD and original intent, so we were able to do an administrative approval of the PUD amendment. Questions staff can answer regarding this proposed plat?
I do have a question. You were showing on the, with the cursor where the residential was. It also lists 2 commercial.
Yes. And that, the applicant is here that can verify some of this as well, but they are looking at that down more along 19th.
19th.
So,
and it did appear, if I'm looking at this correctly, was there a notch out that's left out? No, it's the whole thing. Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, oh, yeah, on the diagram, it looks like there's a notch right at the very corner that's not within this PUD.
Correct.
That we're tonight, but the commercial.
Correct. That is correct.
And I will say, I did get a phone call this afternoon asking if there's still there's a requirement for any type of fencing between what would be the commercial and the residential.
Those aspects of the PUD are still in place. The only thing that changed was some of the lots in terms of their classification of residential versus commercial. So
Very good.
that screening would still be in place.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for staff? Seeing none, thank you very much. I will open the public hearing and ask for those in favor of the applicant or their representative thereof. State your name and address for the record.
Good evening, Commissioners. Stephen Gose with Gose & Associates, 113 East 8th. Here on behalf of the applicant. Mr. Harkins covered it, pretty well. This originally, years ago, was envisioned as more commercial and just a little residential. New property or new owners come in and bought a portion of it to develop out as residential. With the limited number of lots, the street coming off of 19th with a T turnaround at the end serves those 10 residential lots. At the west end of Cypress Mill, there's 4 lots envisioned there with a Y turnaround to meet fire code that would be maintained by the property owners adjacent to that in the future and built at a time when permits are pulled to build anything on those lots. So we've worked with staff with water layout, sewer layout, electric layout on this. And the 2 commercial lots, there's one on 19th and one on Sanger that would remain. And then Notch Out is owned by somebody else. And so that's why that Notch Out is there. So, and I can try to answer any questions you all may have now or at the end of the public hearing.
Any questions? All right, doesn't look like there's any.
you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the item, please step forward and give your name and address for the record.
Mike Loftus. My wife Kim is right over here. We're at 3341 West Charleston Court, adjacent to the property. We are the property owners of this proposed residential tract. What has been laid out is the commercial pieces that are along 19th Street and along Sanger belong to the previous owner. We bought 7.5 something acres inside of that big tract that you saw up on the screen earlier. And we have a home in Berry Creek Gardens, and we're Berry Creek HOA members of the larger Berry Creek organization, and really sensitive to the aesthetics of the neighborhood and the quality of the neighborhood. And so the way it was drawn out was for a couple of purposes. One, to have like, kind, and quality residential construction in that area, and another thing was to prevent a through street on Cypress Mill going out to another major artery, which we felt like would be a negative to the neighborhood. The 4 lots at the end of Cypress Mill would be something that we may or may not develop, but the initial 10 lots, we of course want to have it platted in the 14, but the initial 10 lots we plan on, with approval from you all and City Council, going ahead and developing those lots for 10 residential units. And we have not made any decisions about, and nor has Berry Creek, about bringing it into the HOA. We briefly discussed it, but have not decided one way or another. But I think that our design has been very sensitive to the neighborhood and the area to be able to have a similar quality homes to what is in Berry Creek, which is fully now developed. And I'd entertain any questions from you if you have any.
Since the applicant is here, does anyone have any questions?
Do you have a minimum size for your homes? Are they going to be comparable as well to the Berry
They would
Creek?
be comparable. Stephen, The lot sizes would accommodate at least ground level between 23 and 2,400 square feet.
Okay.
And more if you go up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the item, please step forward, present your name and address for the record.
I'm Jody Deere, 3313 West Charleston Court. I just have some questions. I'm representing many of the neighbors, and they didn't want to get out because of COVID. So I'm representing many of the people that got concerns. So I have a list of questions that I would like to ask Mike or Mr. Gross, the associates. We had, so you addressed the Cypress Mill, road, that's going to be, you're not going to open that up so that you would have access to the subdivision from the Cypress Road?
Ms.
That's
Deere.
a question.
Ms. Deere?
Yes.
Can you address the commission?
You need to address,
yes,
you're
okay.
speaking to us, not to the
Okay,
applicant, to
okay.
us.
So
If you have
that's a question
concern,
that I have.
What's the question?
Okay,
the
I have a
concern?
concern that the road Cypress Mill right now, if it's going to be opened up so that the residents of the new area would be able to go through Berry Creek to get to this new subdivision.
As presented, the plat does not show that.
Okay.
That's what we're
some of the neighbors have drainage issues, concerns, because a lot of the water runs down Charleston Court right now and goes up behind the some of the residences, and they want to make sure that that drainage area is addressed by the new area, the new subdivision. So we also had a concern about there's, and I think Mike explained it, the commercial area is not owned by the Mike Loftus. Yes. So those concerns we would have to go back to the owner of that area. I see by the plat that I know where the access to the roads would be. Is there, and I'm concerned about or asking if there's any green belt between Berry Creek Garden Homes and the new subdivision behind the homes that back up to this new subdivision. So those are my concerns. And I don't think we have anything else. Let's see, let me double check my list here. Okay, because you were talking, the concern too was about whether they were going to join with the Berry Creek HOA. And obviously, Mr. Loftus addressed that, so I don't have any more concerns there. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the item, please step forward and give your name and address for the record. Seeing none, anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the item, please step forward and give your name and address for the record. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and ask for staff alternatives.
So, as proposed, the preliminary plat meets zoning and subdivision regulations. Under the current land development code, if a subdivision has over 30 lots, it's required to have 2 points of access. These each have a single point of access because of the small number of lots. The density is within the RSS, or what was originally RS3 zoning. The comprehensive plan recommends commercial uses, but the proposed development does tie in with the proposed commercial as well as existing residential. As part of that PUD process, the applicant has and their design has also allowed for adequate turnaround capacity with each of the residential areas. With that in mind, you can accept the findings and recommend approval of the preliminary plat as proposed. You can find the request is not appropriate and recommend denial, stipulating the conditions for denial that we would issue in writing to the applicant. Or if you feel additional information and discussion is needed, you can table the item to a date certain. Okay. Questions of staff? All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Discussion and/or a motion?
I move that we accept findings and approve the proposed preliminary plat as presented.
I can second that.
It has been moved and seconded that we accept staff findings and recommend for City Council full approval. We will now vote.
Mr. Rickleman?
Yes.
Mrs. Phillips?
Yes.
Mrs. Jerome?
Yes.
Mr. Albrecht?
Yes.
The motion passes 4 yes to no no's. The next item on the agenda is meeting summary for review and possible action, the special meeting summary of October 6, 2020. Do we have a motion or any changes to be made to those minutes?
Without objection, I move to approve.
Second.
It is moved that we accept the meeting summary of October 6, 2020. We will now vote.
Mr. Rickleman?
Yes.
Mrs. Phillips?
Yes.
Mrs. Jerome?
Yes.
Mr. Albrecht?
Yes.
The motion passes 4 yes to no no's. The next item on the agenda is miscellaneous items from staff, commissioners, or attorney for discussion of possible action. Next Planning Commission meeting will be December 15th, 2020. We have a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that we adjourn. We will now vote.
Mr. Rickleman?
Yes.
Mrs. Phillips?
Yes.
Mrs. Jerome?
Yes.
Mr. Albrecht?
Yes.
The motion passes 4 yes to no no's. Thank you all. Good evening.